Welcome to our discussion on presidential campaigns and who votes, factors in voter participation. To many Americans, presidential campaigns epitomize the democratic process. In presidential election years, nonstop campaigning affords ample opportunities for the public to learn about the candidates and their positions. Campaigns also provide avenues for participation by the people. For example, by volunteering in or contributing to candidates' campaigns, or even just by debating candidates' views around the water cooler. Although these opportunities for citizen engagement are especially abundant during a presidential election, they arise well before, because potential candidates typically position themselves years in advance of a presidential election to secure their party's nomination and to win the general election. As this figure shows, political parties hold conventions in presidential election years to select their party's nominee for President of the United States. As we discussed in an earlier chapter and reviewed earlier in this chapter, the delegates to the national conventions are chosen by citizens in each state who vote in their party's primary election. After the conventions are over and the nominees have been decided, typically by late August or early September of the election year, the nominees and their vice presidential running mates begin their general campaign or election campaign. Usually, the party's choice of nominee is a foregone conclusion by the time of the convention. Eligible incumbent presidents, who have served only one term, are nearly always renominated, and the nominee of the opposing party is often determined by the primary results. The votes tallied on Election Day determine which presidential candidate's slate of electors will cast their ballots in accordance with state law. There are 538 electors in the Electoral College because the number of electors is based on the number of members of Congress, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, plus 3 electors who represent the District of Columbia. A presidential candidate needs a simple majority of votes, 270, to win. This shows the results for each state in the 2008 election. On the Monday following the second Wednesday of December, the slate of electors chosen in each state meets in the state capitol and casts their electoral votes. The results are then announced in a joint session of Congress in early January. In most presidential elections, however, the winner is known on election night because analysts tabulate the outcome in each state and predict the electoral vote. The winner takes the oath of office as president in inaugural ceremonies on January 20th. Not all people are equally likely to participate in the process of voting for the president or other government officials. Yet, of all the forms of political participation, the act of voting has been analyzed perhaps more than any other. Political scientists have examined what factors influence who votes and how voters decide. They and others have analyzed how characteristics such as education level, income, age, race, and the degree of party competitiveness in a given election influence whether a person will vote. Of course, in considering demographic characteristics such as voter age and income level, we must remember that these are merely generalizations. An individual's level of education is the best predictor of whether that person will vote. This table shows that in 2008, less than 1/3 of U.S. citizens with less than a 9th grade education were registered to vote, and only 23% actually voted. As education increases, so too does the likelihood of voting, with measurable differences even among those who have only attended college, those who have graduated, and those with advanced degrees. Among those with a college or an advanced degree, about 3/4 are registered and have voted. During any presidential campaign, you will hear much about age as a factor in the likelihood of voting. Despite efforts by organizations such as MTV's Rock the Vote, and despite campus-focused initiatives by presidential campaigns, young adults are less likely to vote than Americans who are middle-aged and older, though that figure has increased in recent years. In the 2008 election, we saw that the turnout rate among young Americans, those aged 18 to 29, continued to climb, reaching about 53%. The highest turnout rate for voters of that age group since 18-year-olds were first granted the right to vote in 1972 by the passage of and ratification of the 26th Amendment. Although the turnout rate may not have broken records, the youth vote was key in President Obama's election. 66% of young voters favored Obama. But given the lower turnout among young voters in subsequent elections, many wondered if the influence and participation of younger voters had peaked in 2008. However, in the 2012 election, younger voters turned out in record amounts again. Does 2 elections constitute a trend? We shall see in 2016. This figure, which plots the percentage of people in various age groups who voted in the 2008 presidential election, shows a historic trend. As Americans age, they are more likely to vote, whereas 44% of individuals aged 18 to 24 years reported that they had voted. 70% of people aged 65 to 74 said that they had. There are numerous reasons why young people do not vote. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, the reason most often cited is that they were too busy or had a schedule conflict. But members of this age group are also more likely to report that they forgot to vote or were out of town. Age also is related to mobility. Young people might move when they leave for college or to start a new job, and the mobility depresses voter turnout. As the 2008 presidential contest demonstrated, race plays a significant role in voter turnout. For decades after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured that African Americans could freely exercise the right to vote, turnout rate among African Americans lagged substantially behind those of non-Hispanic white Americans. Today, however, voter participation among African Americans nearly equals that of whites, as this chart indicates. The figure also shows that voting participation among Hispanics and Asian Americans lags behind that of whites and African Americans. It also shows that the percentage of non-Hispanic whites who reported they voted in 2008 presidential election was 65%, and for African Americans the voting rate was 61%. The 2008 election saw increases in the turnout rate among all racial and ethnic groups. Importantly, in addition to increased turnout by African Americans, Barack Obama's candidacy netted him 95% of all votes cast by African Americans. Besides education, income is one of the best predictors of whether an American will vote. Typically, in recent years, U.S. citizens with the lowest income level had voter turnout levels of 50 to 60%, whereas those with the highest income level had turnout levels above 85%. As income increases, so too does the likelihood of voting. The reasons for the close correlation between income and likelihood of voting are complex. One possibility is that people with lower incomes may have less belief than higher income earners that the government listens to people like them. Another factor may be that individuals with lower incomes have less leisure time in which to learn about candidates and issues and even to vote. Further, in contrast to the situation in many European democracies, U.S. political parties and political organizations tend not to be highly class-based, whereas European voters are often mobilized by class-based trade unions and by parties themselves to vote on the basis of their economic interests. In the United States, the lowest income workers are less likely to be members of organized labor unions and thus are less likely to be mobilized to vote on the basis of their own economic interests. Finally, researchers have found that party competitiveness in elections also influences voters' turnout. In tight contests in which either party has a viable chance of winning, voter turnout typically is high because the race generates more voter interest than an election in which the winner is a foregone conclusion. Sometimes turnout is high in competitive elections because voter efficacy is higher. A voter may believe that her vote counts more in close elections than in a less competitive race. Voter turnout also runs high in competitive elections because the parties and other campaign organizations work harder to get out the vote when they think they have a chance at winning but know the victory is not guaranteed. Competitive races also draw increased media attention. A tightly competitive local mayoral race might get greater than usual regional news attention, and a close race for the White House brings nearly nonstop media reports and candidate advertisements. The barrage of media coverage increases public awareness and may also boost voter efficacy by conveying the message that every vote counts. The impact of this competitiveness can be seen in recent presidential elections. In 2008, about 130 million Americans voted, about 5 million more than the 126 million who voted in 2004. In both elections, the turnout rate, the proportion of eligible voters who actually voted, was 64%. The 2008 election saw higher turnout rates among those in competitive battleground states, where intense party competition generated turnout. Turnout also was higher among African Americans, Hispanic, and young voters, but lower or flat turnout among other demographic groups offset those increases.